Welcome tonight. We're going to be doing a class where we are painting a lock in watercolor. And if you have been one of my private students, you have seen the class where we do some hatching and cross hatching, and we talk a little bit about value. So we'll see this more on our screen here a little bit more. We did a value study with hatching and cross hatching. We discussed what that is and how you can do it. And so tonight we're actually going to be painting a lock. We're talking a little bit, let's see there we go. We're talking a little bit about value, but we're also exploring some fun in paint and also using a little bit of a razor blade in order to create some white in our painting that just scratches the surface of our paper so we can see the white shining through. So tonight's class is going to be a little bit longer than our usual class, about an hour and a half. I do try to do these within an hour, but this class just went over a little bit. So if you're in for a ride, you want to do a little painting along with me, please don't hesitate to grab your paints and do a little of that. And if you're tuning in live, go ahead and say hello in chat. And I suppose, without further ado, we should just get right to it. So if you find that you have any questions during this class, go ahead and throw them in chat and I can respond to them. Thanks for being here and happy painting. In our last class, we explored cross-hatching and we just did this lock. And we explored value and took our value scale here and tried to translate it into our lock. And why a lock? Well, it's kind of an unusual shape, but not so complex that we couldn't draw it. But also, it gives us an opportunity to look at something that we don't normally draw or think to draw and take those basic shapes and create value and structure with hatching and cross hatching. And so today you are welcome to paint your already cross hatched lock. I'm not going to do that today because we did quite a bit of work here, and you might want to use this as your jumping off point or really kind of as an example for what we're going to do with this lock. So I've just taken this lock and translated it onto watercolor paper. This particular sketchbook is, well, you can't really see it, but you could paint on this, I think, as well. It's a multimedia, so you could paint on it. And a friend turned me on to these, and I really love these sketchbooks. I have some little bee sketchbooks too that I like to use. So we're going to use this as our reference, and then we're going to do some painting. Now, today I believe we're only really going to need two colors. That's going to be a burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. And we're going to see if we can replicate our value study over to our painting study. So you're going to want to get some watercolor set up here. And we're going to do just a little tiny value scale on the side here, and you'll notice that I have this oddly taped off. I'm testing out some tape here that's a drafting tape, but also I wanted to create an edge here for watercolor that could escape. We will see how this works as far as taping off my page. But yeah, let's get going on some of our paint mixtures here. So I have a few different little watercolor holders here for this assignment. I think we will start. I think I have a little bit of gouache in here, but it's okay. So I pre-wet my paints to see if I can get them as concentrated as I want them. So this is my burnt sienna. It's kind of an orangey reddy color. Great color to have in your watercolor painting arsenal. And so we'll get some of that going. I'm using a pretty good sized brush. Now I recommend testing your watercolors whenever you can before you lay them down. Sometimes you just, especially as you're learning, you need to kind of know what they can do. And I might test this in a couple places, but this is feeling kind of watered down a little. And ultramarine blue. These are a great combination together. They kind of gray out. And ultramarine blue does a really nice job of granulating, in my opinion. Just add a little bit of water here. Okay. Clean off my brush. So let's do some testing. So the more pigment that you have in a mixture, the more intense it's going to be, the darker it will be. So I have a pretty good bit of pigment here. Just doing a little test here on the side. When we add more water to that mixture, it's going to lighten that mixture up. In our private class, we will do more on value next time, but this is just a way for you to kind of think about it in advance. It looks like I'm getting paint on my paper here. Okay, so I'll try to protect my paper here a little bit. I have some watercolor paper on order, so I am waiting a little bit for some paper. So we'll just continue to add water to our mixture. This will lighten it. So you kind of go from the consistency of maybe cream to watery tea. And as this dries, you'll kind of see that difference. I'm going to continue to add some water. And we'll kind of see how these dry. I typically like to do about 5 levels of value for things. I mean, if you can do more, that's fabulous, but 5 I think is a good number because you have your darkest dark and you work your way to your lightest light. And in watercolor, we work from light to dark, which is the opposite of what we would do if we were doing this in oil. So we'll kind of let that dry. We're going to mix up some other colors here too from our 2 main colors here. Now, if you have a bigger palette, I recommend it. In this instance where I'm kind of painting here in a limited space with this camera, I think this is all right for this particular assignment. I can take some of my blue here and mix it into this burnt sienna, and you can see you get a nice gray when you mix these two colors together. Depending on what's dominant will depend on whether it leans warm or cool. And more ultramarine blue is going to make it more cool. More burnt sienna is going to make it warm. So I'm going to give myself a couple of options here because I do think that we can lay down a very light layer of a gray color to get started. You can see here this would be a bit warmer. You may not be able to see on the little screen here, but this is a bit warmer. But you can play with it. You can probably hear upstairs a little bit. Okay. Again, I think it's really worth testing your colors if you're unsure about how dark they are. So if you have to have a spare piece of paper or watercolor paper around, do that. You can see here that I have a more blue gray here. We kind of have this browny dark gray and then a little bit warmer gray. Grayish brown. So as I can test here, that's a really nice kind of light color of this overall gray color. If I want, maybe I'll add a little bit more water to that. And I can either use this filbert brush, which is a 1/2 inch, which will really fill in that space. But I'm also going to use a little bit of a number 6 round brush because we have some pointy areas that that I might want to fill in. I am going to try to preserve some of this light area here and maybe a light area in here and up here. Well, actually, before I even get started, there is one thing that you may want to do if you're drawing along. So if you feel like your drawing is too dark, you can take a kneaded eraser and just run it over it. It'll pick up any excess kind of lead bits, and it can kind of lighten it so it lightens your drawing a little bit. Just a little personal preference. I know it's helpful here on the screen to be able to see what's happening here. So I'm dipping my round brush and my filbert here in this gray color so I can kind of get into some of these spots that are pointy, tricky. And then I can kind of just do this overlay. Whoops. I do want to try to preserve, it's not the end of the world if I paint over an area that should be kind of light. Guess I can go over this part. This will also give you, if you're doing this all in one swoop and you're kind of moving the paint bead around, you'll have a nice smooth base. And here I am going to paint with my round brush and connect these areas. But I think I'm going to, let's see, we'll preserve some white of the paper here. And then we'll work on this handle a little bit. Yeah, because we have a light area here we kind of want to be aware of. And down here. So we can just kind of outline this top of the lock, but we're preserving a little bit of the light there. Might kind of go around here just to and fill in any areas that you may have missed. And I will probably paint this here. We're going to paint over this area, but we have some shadows here that are cool. I'm just kind of looking at my reference. Now, all my students should have a worksheet for this class. And I might just actually water down my brush a little bit, dip it into water, and lay that down there. All right. Cool. So we'll let this dry for a minute. Also, kind of at the same time, we can do this background a little bit because our background is cool. This will give us a little bit of shaping, I think, and it can be very light, but we need this to dry really quickly before we get too carried away here. So we're going to take just a minute and let this dry. Okay, so we'll zoom in here. You can kind of see what's happening on our lock here. We've laid down our first layer. It's a nice kind of gray blue. What we'll do next, since this is dry a little bit, I'm just going to lay down a light bit of blue. So if we look at our value scale here, you can see more water, less water, more pigment, less pigment. And so when you're thinking about value or color, you're going to want to have more water. I'll bring up, this is the tiniest little palette, but it's so kind of fun. So I've added some water in here, dipping into my ultramarine blue. It's just a little bit of this blue color. I can test it at the bottom here. And that's super light. You might want to add just a hair more. Oops, got a little on the paper already. So when I look at this image of our lock, which I will throw up, actually I'm going to throw this up on the screen really quickly. You can see that lock here on the side. Maybe make it a little bit bigger here. Come on. How in the background here we have some blue and it's casting a shadow over on this side. So I'm just going to, with this filbert brush, just kind of paint this in here. We're really focusing on the lock today, so we're not getting too carried away with the background, but I do want to place it here. it will also help kind of make your lights stand out. And if there's some overlap, it's really not going to matter. And I'm moving that bead of water just around here. Probably should have started with this, but that's okay. And this is kind of why I have the tape here, to just kind of create a buffer there. You could even add a little bit more blue in there if you want. Kind of drop it in a little wet into wet in some of these areas. And that way it kind of disperses nice and soft. Let's see, did I miss any areas here? Got kind of this area too. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to want to hit this with a hair dryer so I'm not dragging into that wet area. So I will mute myself really quickly for a minute and hit this with a hair dryer, and we will be right back. Okay. So I'll zoom in here for a minute and you can kind of get a good look. Let's see if this will focus. Focus. At what's happening here. We've laid down kind of this muted gray color. We have our background kind of laid out for this. And of course, we're going to add much more to the lock. And I think now we can do kind of a mid-grade gray in areas. This is a pretty good gray. I think we can just do another wash here, a couple washes, and then we'll get into this rust color. Now, when I squint my eyes and look at this image on the screen, you know, we have a distinct kind of dark gray here on this side. And then we have our dark shadows and rust over on this side. Our background is going to be kind of dark, these areas here. And we have a shadow under here. So we have a little bit of work that we can do with a little bit more of a gray color. So I'm going to start painting in this part of the lock, and maybe I can use that color in the shadow here and maybe along here a little bit more. So we'll zoom out here, and you can see my colors here in my little feather palette. I want this to be kind of gray. I might need a little bit, oops, wrong color. Might need to dip into my pigment a little bit. I'm going to add a hair of this burnt sienna. I can test this. I add, when in doubt, you can add a little bit more water to your mixture because it's okay if you need to do another layer. And when I'm looking at my image here, I see that there's this edge here that we don't see in our drawing, that we can kind of draw in with our paintbrush. Oops, a little too wet here. So I can kind of draw in this edge, and it follows down through here. Don't worry, we're going to fill in this area. And we'll just kind of move this bead. We also have a very dark area underneath the lock. Do that in another stage here. And you could even follow this around really thinly along this edge. Okay. We also have this shadow that starts here and kind of goes up. It sort of fades out a little bit in this area, but I'm going to go along just the outside, if I can stay within my drawing here. That connects here. I'm going to dip my brush in some water. I'm going to tap it on my towel, and I can go in and soften this edge just a little bit. All right. And dipping back into my pigment here. Can also go and catch this shadow here. Whoops. We also have a shadow here, so I'm just noting that. And I can lay down this shadow back behind here too. Now we're going to warm this one up a little, but for now we're kind of noting this placement. Now, oops, I'm going to drop my paintbrush here. Now, if you find that you have kind of screwed up your drawing a little bit, you can take a dry brush and either kind of smooth out or lift a little bit. I'm just going to do that there. Okay. Now, I think I can do a little shaping here and add some of these shadows in. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to add a little bit of this mixture of this burnt sienna that's a little bit warmer here. I'm still using a 6 brush, and it really depends on what size your drawing is here as to how you want to, how big of a brush that you want to have. But I'm gonna just paint in this back area. So one of the questions that kind of has popped into my brain here is you might have questions on how do you know which colors to use to create this color for this assignment. And it's just really kind of experience. And these are two really great colors to have in your palette. Anyway, I'm going to drop a little bit of this color over here. This is still wet for me, so it'll warm it up just a hair. Now it feels really dark. I think it won't, it'll dry a little bit lighter here. We also have an edge here that isn't in this drawing, but it was in our crosshatch drawing, which I'm just going to snag this so I can show you. In the crosshatch part, we have this edge. So we want to show that in our painting there. And so, looking at my reference here a little bit, I can indicate this. If anything, I may have to come back and darken this. But I'm noting it. And as you can see on this side, we have kind of a bit of a darker edge. I can dip into a little bit more blue pigment, or this blue gray. I don't think you can actually see it here. Also, we'll show you. I have this blue gray. It's pretty. This is pretty watered down. I don't want it to be like super dark, so even if it's tea consistency, this is okay. Might have to tap my brush on a little bit of a paper towel. And I can go back over this area. If you need to add a little more pigment, you can do that. Oops, I keep dipping into the wrong blue over here. And I'll hit this edge too. And we have the shadow under here that is pretty dark, but I'm just going to indicate it there. And we could even kind of gently indicate here. Okay. Now, when I look at this area, so I am going to let this dry. We also have this area that's in shadow too, but it feels a little bit cooler. So I'm going to let this all dry here and then reapproach it. But we are building the structure of this lock a little bit. Okay. We also have this nice warm bit here. So we've laid down our cool tones. Now we can kind of go in a little bit with our warmer, more rusty tones too, and kind of build this. And I'm just kind of looking at my reference, thinking about it a little bit. I think I'm going to hit this with a hair dryer to kind of expedite some of what we're going to do next. So one moment and I'll be right back. I'm going to mute myself really quickly. All right. That makes things a lot easier. Yes, let's go in, because this might be a good gray tone. There are definitely some edges. Okay, here we go. We're going to make one more pass with a gray tone. And might be a little bit of a mixture. Definitely going to need a little bit more water and pigment here. So I'm going to dip into some of my other darker, more intense mixtures. Still with a nice, you see here, a nice kind of tea consistency. We don't want it too dark. We're going to go in with a bigger brush. I think I'm going to use a 10 brush, because there are just some variations here. Still might need a little more pigment. So this will have a little bit more browny consistency. You can always test what this is going to look like on a different piece of paper. But as I look at this, we have a little bit different variations in our pigment here. So we can kind of just add this second layer of this kind of brown gray mixture. To our lock. It's not too dark, I don't think. But we can kind of indicate some of this color changes. I'm going to catch this edge here a little bit. This will help give this a little bit of dimension. Just slightly kind of moving it around here. And you can dab in some areas to give it kind of texture. I'm kind of dabbing in that area. Then I can take a dry brush and kind of smoosh it around to soften up some of those edges a little bit. And you'll just want to try to make sure that you're preserving any areas that you want to remain white-ish or light-ish. What's great about this combination, as I mentioned before, it definitely granulates, so it'll create some interesting texture all on its own. And now that I have this back area dry, I could even lay this down here in the back. I'm still going to have to darken this area just a hair, I think. But that will help. You can see how that automatically makes that recede a little bit. And this is drying pretty fast. But I probably will hit it with a hairdryer to kind of expedite this process. I like these classes to be around an hour if we can make it happen. So we'll do a quick shot and be right back. Okay. Gonna zoom out here a little bit. Zoom out. Okay. All right, so some of our bits have gotten lost in this a little bit, but not too bad. You should be able to see some of these areas. We're working up to those darkest darks. So now I think the fun begins when we can enter into our rust color, which is primarily going to be our burnt sienna. So I'm going to just lift some of this pigment out of my palette here. We're going to still gray out some of our burnt sienna colors, but we are going to work our way up here. So I'm going to take just a little bit of pigment here, and I'm going to add a bit of water. We want this to be lower on the value scale because we're going to do just a little bit of a wash here on this top part of our lock. You can always test it. That seems nice and light. And we have this portion of our lock that is warmer. And we can just layer that over the top. We're not scrubbing too much here to remove any of this pigment. We're going to try to preserve our light colors. Oops. That little got away from me here. We can do a nice kind of layer. Over this bit of the lock. You could even hit this top part if you wanted. Just a little bit. Might hit it again. Make sure I don't lose the warmth here. But it does a nice job of creating some texture here and some warmth. You honestly could even go over this bit here where we have our shadow there. As long as we're not scrubbing, we're doing okay. I think you could even drop some of this into this shadow a little bit to warm it up a touch. Even over here you could do that. I'm just sort of tapping this pigment in. Now we did lose our edge over here, which we can paint in later. All right. So this is good. We're going to let that dry. And in the meantime, I'm going to hit my palette again and add a little bit more burnt sienna. I can actually use, I don't want to have it too dark just yet. So you can see how I'm transferring it here. You can always test down below. A nice consistency here. And then I can start defining some of these areas that are kind of obscured. Now, you might want to use a smaller brush depending on how big your drawing is. But I'm going to move this around, keeping an eye on the shape that has been created here. Going around some of these bolts. Now we can, what's nice about starting light is we can preserve some of this orange color and then go in even a little bit darker. But right now we're kind of noting different areas that are going to have this rusty color. And you can dab if you want, kind of scribble if you want. Because this does a nice job of creating that texture. I'm going around these bolts. I don't want to lose them. So we're just kind of noting some edges here. We have this area here. It's got this great rust color. Now we also have an kind of a lost edge here on that part of the lock on my drawing, which I can kind of bring back into my painting here. But right now we're just making some notes. And then this area kind of goes all the way down. So we can even cover. Again, this is light enough that I can still see my drawing underneath at this point. There's this edge here that I might try to preserve, but you could also use a razor blade to cut that out to lighten it as well. Or I use a gel pen. Sorry, my chair makes all kinds of noise as I kind of sit back to kind of look at the screen here, what's happening. And then this sort of climbs up the side here. You can see here at the bottom edge, if we overlap this gray color, it also creates a little bit of a darker edge. We have some other areas around this bolt. And here I can kind of try to correct my drawing if I need to. Still trying to preserve the light of the paper if I can. I think it's a little bit thicker at the bottom, but it's okay. And any other areas I need to note. It's kind of nice as things dry and you can see how the color is gonna dry. Well, you can draw into some of these areas, like this bolt is a little bit darker. And you can correct any sort of drawing that you might need to do after things dry a little bit. We have some rust on this bolt here. And you can even stipple along this edge. We've got some rust, so you could stipple with your paintbrush. Chosen not to do the lettering for this. You could even stipple in here if you want to kind of give some texture. Now again, your pigment isn't too dark, so when it has a little bit more water in it, you can kind of create some variation like this, and it will dry kind of nice and light, sort of like freckles. Not being too And last but not least, it's nice probably to lay down a little bit of this on this mechanism here. I'm just going to kind of lightly dab in here. We do have some of these darker parts here, the corners of this. And we do have this hook here that has a little bit of rust and the paint is chipping off, and I might just indicate a little bit of that with this color. It's not as dark as that is, but we'll kind of go in again. And indicate it. Okay. I'm going to zoom out here a little bit. So you can see we're kind of moving right along here. It's kind of funny when you are next to the image here on the screen, you can see some of those areas of value that could get darker, or where your drawing is, like my drawing's a little fatter. My lock is a little bit fatter. All right, so we have a pretty good start, excuse me, here. And so now let's make a darker rust mixture with a little bit more pigment. I'm actually going to dip in here. Should use a bigger brush here, but so I'm taking my burnt sienna here, more pigment, and then dipping into my ultramarine blue. I still want this to be, I think, on the warm side, but it just needs to be a little bit more concentrated. At this juncture, you may want a bit of a smaller brush. So I might move to that. You're definitely going to want to test your paint to see what kind of consistency it is. So I'm going to snag a bigger brush here, or I mean a smaller brush. And I have a couple of options here. I guess this is a 6, so it's not much, it's not smaller than my other brush. This is a triangle brush, which no, you don't need to buy a special brush, but what's nice about this is it has a nice point. Not sure if that's going to focus, that I might use a little bit. But I also have this little, this is a 3 brush. We can test and see how it will work here. And so I can dip into this pigment here. Let's zoom in a bit. And I can put some darker areas in here. This might be a shadow underneath our bolts. I kind of need to define this edge here. And maybe it needs to be a little bit darker. But we're creating different layers of value, which then starts making this look a little more like our image. It's giving us a little bit more variation here. Now, this is dropping a little bit of pigment here. Now I may go in with a little light wash of my orange there. It looks like I didn't finish that one, but that's okay. But you can start adding this to some of these darker areas. You can define some edges a little bit. Okay. And you can stipple this around too. So I'm just going to keep kind of moving around this piece, areas that I feel like, you know, I need to define a bit of my drawing. A little bit darker areas here that we can see in our worksheets. But you can see by kind of layering this, it's going to kind of come alive. And start looking like our rusty lock. And I think letting some of this rusty color, this light wash, peek through in different areas is kind of nice. And we have this dark edge here. This is a nice, there's an edge here, and there's also some shadowing that's happening here on this side of, oops, this door, if you will. And so I will kind of indicate more of the shadow. Probably going to move into this with a cool color eventually here before we end. But and I might actually use the same color to indicate my keyhole. We're going to use our darkest dark in the keyhole, but I don't want to lose it in my painting here. And we have something here that's lighter, so I'm just going to note that spot. And this brush that I'm using here, I never hardly ever use it, but this is a Kolinsky Sable brush, and you can see it's a Trekell brush. It's got this tiny tip. I'm not sure if they sell these anymore or not, but it has a nice kind of point that's allowing me a little bit of some detail here. I think I will kind of soften this edge just a little bit. I feel like even though this is, quote, a simple little lock, it offers us a little bit of refinement and some fun here to continue to work on this. So this might be something that you will want to continue working on past our time here. And we have a bit of a shadow under here that is cool, but I'm going to just indicate it there. Might add just a little bit of water, kind of go up into here a little to kind of enrich some of this area. Whoops. I'm going to lose my keyhole. And I'm going to do it myself. Darn it. And what other areas might I need to hit? So I'm just kind of looking around. Could even hit this edge here. We have this dark shadow line that's underneath here. But I don't want to lose that either. Don't mind the noise is up above. I'm going to also just do a layer over this shadow because it's kind of feels like I was losing it here. Okay. Now when I look at this overall, I feel like I need a little bit of shadow over here. So I might do a light wash of kind of a gray, a little bit more blue in here, a little bit more pigment here, and just like one swipe. We'll see what happens here. And if you find that you feel like some other areas could use that, you can use that same kind of swipe. Okay. So we're going to mix up an even darker color. This is going to have more pigment in it, a lot more pigment. Actually, I'm going to use a different slot here because we want it to be quite a bit darker. That's pretty dark. Might need just a little hair bit more water for this, because I don't want it to be too dark. There are just some shadows that we need to put into our lock here. We're going to test it out with my little tiny brush here. Okay, that's good. So this is a cool tone that allows us to put in some of these shadows and some edges. We have this area here that I want to add in, which is this edge. Now some of that is a little bit wet, so it's going to move. Too much pigment here. We're just going to do our best here. Then we have some shadows that we can add in underneath our bolts here. And maybe it even takes a little bit smaller brush, but I also have this edge here that's kind of dark that I can define a little bit. Kind of define this edge a bit. This is a little high. I drew this a little bit high, but that's okay. Just hitting some of these edges in areas to just add that extra layer of darkness on our value scale. I still feel like we need a shadow, a little bit more of a shadow here, but I'm going to wait until some of this is going to be dry. Just defining some edges and looking for some of those areas that are a little bit darker. Now on this, I've lost kind of my edge here on this bolt, but that's okay. You could even take this dark color and put it here. I keep adding this shadow because it just feels like it was not quite dark enough. This is also a great color for the paint that has disappeared up here that you can just sort of dab in on this hook. This is going to dry lighter than it looks here. I guess there's this little bit here. I guess without context, it just looks like a floating dot, but I'll kind of add this in here. And we don't want to cover up all our orange. It gives it character here. But now I'm going to draw in my keyhole here. I think we can go even darker for the keyhole, but I don't want to lose it, and it's kind of lost here. Which its shape's kind of getting lost here. But you can see as we're doing some of this layering process, our lock starts coming to life a little bit. I might try to define some of those edges. You could even, this has some like lines here, you could even indicate lightly some of these lines. So keep looking at your reference. And seeing where you can add a little bit more. We're almost done here. Now I lost a bit of this edge here. We'll see. Okay. I'm going to hit this with a hairdryer, and we're going to do another swipe. We're going to look and see what our keyhole looks like, if it needs to be darker or not. And there is a bit of a shadow here that I want to add to. And I might need to do something about my little dot there. So, actually, I'm going to take just a little bit of a gray color, because there is this in the background there. Okay, I'm going to hit it with a hairdryer. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm afraid that maybe I might have cut off part of this program. I hope not, but let's see. We'll zoom in here. Maybe. You could always do it in even another pass to darken this if you wanted to. I'm going to do a soft, or I think a soft shadow. And I may need a little bit more pigment here, because this is sort of in shadow here. And I can just tap that in there. I might lose my keyhole a little bit. Soften up some of this with a clean brush. And I'll hit it with my hairdryer again. We'll see where our keyhole is here. And I think we can hit this also with a razor as well to bring up some highlights. Actually, now that I am looking at this, the one thing that I'm missing is a little bit of red there. I think that will be good. Okay, I'm going to hit it with hairdryer. Be right back. Okay, so I added my shadow. I feel like my keyhole is actually dark enough. The only thing that I could see with it is maybe I need to improve that circle a little bit. So I can take my same pigment that I used and maybe fix my drawing just a hair. There is an edge here that gets a little bit lost in here, but I think that's okay. The other thing when I'm looking at this is this part really stands out, and it's supposed to be recessed a little bit. So I'm going to take a little bit of my ultramarine blue. And really, when you're working in this way, when you're working on any kind of drawing, you're going to be looking at your reference, assessing, and continually doing that. And squinting your eyes to look at value. So I'm going to just push this back a little bit. You can see this is a little bit cooler in my paint here, but that pushes it back so it's not moving forward so much. Okay, now I'm going to grab a razor and scratch into this painting. So I'll be right back. I'm going to snag that and show you how you can bring out your lights. Now, if you are a young person, you would need your parents' permission to have such an item. If you have an X-Acto knife, that would work just as well. Or you can use a gel pen as well. Now you're going to want this to be dry when you do this. And there might just be, you know, don't get your finger in the way. There might just be some areas, zoom in here, that you will want to lighten. And you can see here how that lifts the paper so it brings some lightness to the surface. It also is nice because it can be a little bit not unpredictable, but not uniform is what I'm looking for. It's going to obviously work a little bit more in an area that's already got quite a bit of pigment or that's dark. You may also have to move your page for this. So I'm going to try to keep this on in our picture here. And you're kind of drawing with this technique here. I'll zoom out here just a hair. We definitely have this along our keyhole, which helps define our edge a little bit. Now, probably a light hand is better than a heavy hand, but it's still kind of fun to bring out some of these edges, especially if I lost an edge. So I'm kind of using the side of this and moving this way, but you know, you can go up and down as well. It just doesn't show as well. Yeah, I think this is particularly nice on our little bolts. All right. Well, that is our lock class. I hope that you enjoyed using a couple of different colors to create 3 variations of colors, and that you learned something new. In our next class, we will be talking about value. That'll be a private Zoom class for the Watercolor Rock Stars. And we will probably be looking at just one color and how we can continue with this variation of value. I encourage you to share your images in our Facebook group, and I can't wait to see what you created and how you did. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you very soon. Hey, thanks everybody for tuning in. If you have questions, again, please put them in our Facebook group. Or, you know, might give you a few seconds. You can put them in our questions here today. I hope you enjoyed this class. This lock looks a whole lot different than your cross-hatched lock, but I hope you had fun creating both. Sometimes it's very valuable to draw things that we don't normally see and paint them, just to practice the art of seeing and observation. So thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. And it looks like Jean is still with us. And yeah, I'm glad that you had a good class, Jean. Thanks for being here. There we go. We can put her up on the screen there. It's awesome. And I always love these names on YouTube. You guys crack me up. Jan, thanks for tuning in too. Appreciate you being here. And I can't wait to see you guys in person. It feels like it's been a while. And yeah, if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in our Facebook group. Feel free to share your locks or give yourself a little bit of time. Keep working on them. So take care. Have a good night. Tomorrow is Friday, so I hope you have a great rest of your evening. I will see you soon.